What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Overcoming Average. Rick and Rob again here today. We're talking about 12 Rules for Life, Chapter 5 and 6. So, Chapter 5 is do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. And Chapter 6, which I think these kind of tie nicely together, is set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. So, what do you guys think? What stuck out to you right away with in regards to the children? When we can really just kind of go wherever. I think in today's world with all the stuff that's happening, a lot of these, in my opinion, kind of flow together in regards to raising your kids, and then how are they going to act in society? How are they going to treat others? Are they going to, basically be good adults as kids? Are they going to manage themselves before trying to criticize the world? So anyway, thoughts right off the bat.
Well, my thought was, wow, this is like, just goes right at you, like the most controversial, like, don't make your kids do anything that makes you dislike them. It's like, ooh, do I dislike my kids? Like, it's kind of harsh. So yeah, definitely I found controversial. It's hard to make you think like that, but when you really think about it, like, if you don't like your kids, then nobody else is gonna. If you love your kids the most, and everybody else, and if they annoy you, they're definitely gonna annoy other people.
That's right.
If you want your kid to be successful in this world, you gotta teach them how to interact with people and get along with others. If they can't get along with the kids around the neighborhood, they're gonna continue to have trouble socializing and talking to girls, develop relationships. So yeah, he said like age 4, kids who aren't socialized at age 4, they're gonna have a hard time. So
yeah, I watched a documentary recently called Crumb, and it's super bizarre. It's a really weird documentary, but it's a good documentary. It's from the 90s, and it's about a guy named Robert Crumb, and I don't know if you guys have ever heard of him.
No.
But he's a cartoon artist, and I'm sure you've seen his stuff. It's sort of weird looking, almost pornographic, like real like.
Rob's seen it.
It's weird.
Hey.
And there's a guy named Mr. Natural that he draws, and like it's like the old looking man with a real big nose and a long beard, and they're like little cartoon characters. I didn't realize it, and I heard somebody mentioned it was a crazy documentary to kind of see inside the mind of maybe not a psychopath, but somebody that's a sexual deviant, a rapist, that sort of thing. And I had no idea, it was just, it was a podcast I was listening to, and they said, this is a really good documentary. So I pulled it up and watched it. But the reason I bring that up is he got really famous for his cartoons, but these filmmakers go to his house, and his brother's there, and they're just very strange. Like, the brother's probably almost 40, still living at home, like yelling at his mom in the background, close the window. And these documentary guys are there making the film. And ultimately, they were all cartoon artists, and they drew stuff that was just kind of disturbing to people, but it ended up being popular. But it made me think about raising kids, and that part stuck out to me as well, because the kind of, they're all sort of crazy in the family, but the brother ends up committing suicide. He just, I don't know. It's like his life had no purpose, and mainly because he wasn't socialized. They talked about how he'd never had a girlfriend, and he still lived at home, and he tried to live on his own. And I just thought, man, how sad to live a whole life and not find the joy of a life, and it made me think about my own kids, and especially that, mine are still young, but that stuck out to me, like socialize them before they're 4 years old. And science kind of says if you do that, they're more likely to Well, and I think what he specifically talks about is that the socialization begins to leave the parents' hands and goes into the hands of the peers.
Yeah.
So you're kind of like, okay, now our job is not always all over, but now there's a lot more interaction between neighbors and peers and kids.
And peers are not going to be as forgiving as the parents.
Yeah.
So, it really puts pressure on you to get them going and acting the right way, not pulling hair, biting, and, sharing toys and stuff like that.
Yeah. And, the reason I bring that documentary up is it's sort of the opposite. You see that and you think that would just be the worst thing, is just to have your kid never be socialized, never get out on their own, never have a family, and some of the traditional things that I would hope for my children. And to see that it ends in a disaster like that was just really sad for me. And it made me think about, it was kind of fresh on my mind with watching that and then talking about raising my kids. I'm like, man, I love seeing my kids out there playing with other kids, having arguments, wanting to play longer, kids not wanting to play with them. I think that is good for them. That little bit of turmoil, that struggle, because the two things that really stuck out to me in the chapter were he talked about discipline and punishment, and how both of those have really bad connotations. You imagine jail, and you imagine just these horrible things with discipline and punishment, but they're both actually very necessary in our growth. Punishment meaning when you do something bad, you get a bad result, a bad consequence. And then of course, discipline, I think discipline's probably got the better of the two connotations, but there's just hey, you gotta clean up your room. You gotta, feed the dog. There's a responsibility there. So
like you can't act this way, but as soon as you act the right way, then you could come and join us and have fun and be part of society. You can't hold resentment towards your kids. He was telling me, or Jordan was telling me,
yeah,
he told the story of a patient who was seeing him, and he was arguing with his kids over bedtime for like 45 minutes a day. And they did the math, and it was something like a month and a half of 40-hour work weeks.
Yeah.
And he's like, if you're...
Every year he was trying to put his kid to bed for a month and a half of work.
He said it's inevitable that you're going to have some resentment if you're banging your head against the wall for, 60 hours a month, or no, 60 hours a year fighting with your kid. It's going to cause resentment. You need to then work it out. And then it made me think of Vince Lombardi. He said, fatigue makes cowards of us all. So you're struggling, you're having a hard time with putting the kids to bed, and, parenting is tough. And a lot of times you just want to, just eat the cookie and just go on and do your own thing. But, you just keep doing that. You're teaching your kid to do temper tantrums or something like that. So,
well, and I think when you look at that, the title of the chapter 5, it's parenting, but really it's pointing back to us. We are not supposed to let our kids do things that make us dislike them.
The reason why I think this topic was so controversial is because I feel like today's societies, you need to let your kid be them and let them blossom on their own and do their own thing. But then Jordan pretty extensively said, no, apes, if you believe we came from apes are murderers. It's not, indigenous societies, we think the ignoble savage and that they're peaceful and whatnot. No, there's murder. Like the murder rates were incredibly high. We have to socialize dogs. Dogs need to socialize, or else, So no, we can't let kids do whatever they want. You can't let your kid be who they are to some extent, as long as it's, you know, acceptable in society. Like if, you know, you're doing things that are going to make you antisocial, it's
Well,
not good.
and I think he gave a good example of the restaurant. Like I know for probably all of us with young kids, it's like going to a restaurant. Usually there's the sort of in the back of your mind, you're thinking might be a disaster and the kids might lose it and we're going to have to leave early or whatever. But he gives the example of how people really enjoyed his kids and restaurants and, oh, how cute. But they knew there was a time limit. They were like, as soon as the wheels start coming off, we're ready to go. Like they didn't go and plan on, we're going to spend 3 hours in a restaurant with our friends. Like they had an exit strategy. And that's part of parenting is like, I think letting the kid be who they are within boundaries, you know?
Yeah.
And again, I think that adversity, that the struggle is important. It's important for the kids to go through things and see things that they can't have and they're not allowed to do. That's absolutely essential. But also, I mean, I have 3 kids and they're totally different. I mean, their personalities, their stuff that makes them upset, and even the discipline is different. Like I'm trying to remember the 3 principles he talked about in the book, but one of them was make very few rules. Like don't have a huge list of rules. And I think that's important too. Like we're not gonna have a huge list of things you'd remember, but there's 2 or 3 that you have to do. And I know for us, one of the most recent ones is don't just go to somebody's house without letting us know where you've gone. And even though it's innocent and maybe there's a parent there, for us, that's one that we're kind of like, you can't break this rule, period. We just need to know where you are at all times. And, I think it was the next step was he was talking about when discipline on those rules, you just kind of take it slow, escalate a little bit rather than just go straight to spanking or, long periods of timeout or whatnot. So
Are we going to dish on how we resent our kids?
So I find it very interesting at how the kids behave, at least in my family. So I kind of think they treat the home life as kind of a test lab
for sure
to see what sort of what's acceptable and what's not. And I'll say this: when they're out in public or they're in school, they behave very, very well. I've never had complaints from teachers. They're always the sweetest kid in the class. When they go to a friend's place, they're not breaking things and running around like crazy people. So they're very respectful of others. But there are times at home where, especially my daughter, she'll push all the buttons she can to see what she can, what's tolerable and what's not. And I think we do a good job of setting boundaries. I think we could follow through a little bit more on the discipline side. But whatever we're doing might not work perfectly at home. Like she's not an angel in the house, but when she gets out into the world, she seems to do okay.
When they're totally exhausted from school, it sort of stinks as a parent that you get them after they've kind of spent their best hours with somebody else. I know since the coronavirus stuff has happened, it's basically an extended summer for us. And I've enjoyed that. It's also maddening. You really appreciate those teachers and so you can have a little bit of a break. But there is something to be said about not only the personality of the kid, and I think that's why a lot of these rules that he brings up they're super generic. They can kind of apply to anybody. And he even mentions you're going to have the stubborn kid. You're going to have the kid that cowers if you just give him a cross eye. Like, he does talk about that. And I think that's very important to understand. It's hard. I think for me, that's the hardest thing is to figure out, why does this disciplinary action work for this kid and that's not for the other one at all? But I think the reason this particular chapter was so controversial is because the thought of anybody in this helicopter generation, helicopter parent generation, the thought of them disliking their child is sort of, oh, I can't believe that. But it is very true. If anybody's really honest, it doesn't mean you don't love your child, but when they're screaming their head off and they're being disrespectful and rude, you don't like them. You don't like that action. It's frustrating. And then I love, Rick, what you said about just that fatigue. That's probably the most dangerous thing is, fine, whatever. Just stay up all night. I don't care. Just whatever you need to do to just be quiet. And that's a failure on the parents' part, honestly. It's really hard. And also being married, he mentioned 2-parent homes by and large end up better for a kid. But there is more complication there because there's 2 people now going in the same direction. And I know for me, I might have an idea of how to parent, and my wife might have a different idea. And that causes a frustration between us because it's like, well, I think we should discipline them this way. And she thinks it's the other way. But I think that is probably the good part about the 2-parent home is the balance of, good cop, bad cop sometimes, and on different issues too. I know that I'm the good cop on some things and a bad cop on others, and my wife is, good cop on some, and so it's a balance of the two.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And to your point about Vince Lombardi's quote, so 2 parents, less fatigue, right?
Yeah.
So
spread in the work.
So the wife might be exhausted because she's been dealing with the kids all day, and I come home from work, so I can pick up where she left off. And she might be emotionally drained. Well, I'm fresh, so I can come into that. The other good part about the 2 parents, the good cop, bad cop, is, we might send a child to their room for doing something, and they might not completely understand why, because they're so emotional at the moment that all they can think about is what they're not getting.
Yeah.
And then they throw a tantrum, and they actually forget what they were so upset about. So at that point, I might go into the room and just sit there and, maybe give them a hug and just talk and ask the questions and say, hey, what are you so upset? I know what the answers are, but just to get them to talk through it, to know that, why we reacted the way we did, and in the future, how we can compromise to do that better. And I think that helps.
Yeah. Well, and to go along with that, they're kids. And I remember we had a nanny one time. It was just a disaster. Like, she, to be honest, just doesn't have kids. I don't know if she'd ever nannied in that capacity before, but having 2 young ones that are just able to move, one's running, and, it's a lot to handle. And I remember every day we would come home and she would say, she wouldn't even lie. Some babysitters are like, oh, they were great. And you can look at her face and be like, oh, I know you're ready to get out of here because they gave you a run for your money. But she was just like, no, they were a disaster. It was really terrible. They were really not behaving. And we were like, wow. And my kids are generally well behaved. They can be wild at times, but they're kids. And so we thought, okay, we're going to have a talk. So we sat the kids down and we had a talk with them. And, hey, you cannot treat the babysitter like this. We expect you to treat her with respect and all that. And then the next day, it was the same thing. Yep, they were terrible. And after a couple of days, we were like, all right, we need to get some nanny cams. Like, my wife was kind of opposed to it before, but we knew something's not right here. So as we started asking questions, it was like, of the kids, they're too young to articulate what actually happened. But the babysitter finally said, well, your middle child wasn't listening, so I put her in timeout for an hour, and she was 3 years old.
Oh my gosh!
And so
that's an eternity for 3
we're
years.
like, well, one of the rules, we're trying to pass that on is, when you have your own kids, it's a minute per year of their age. So let's try 3 minutes. And Jordan Peterson talks about timeout as being a mental anguish for the child. Like 3 minutes is an absolute eternity. So 60 minutes clearly is that she didn't understand that.
You guys stole my quote was going to be, a patient adult can defeat a 2-year-old. Old age and treachery can always overcome youth and skill, because time lasts forever when you're 2.
Yeah, that's very true.
So if you're tired, you just got to suck it up 1, 2, 3 times, do the hard work, discipline the right way. even just sitting there and doing nothing and making it awkward and the kid's tired, they're going to go to bed, you know. I was buying a car with Melissa, and I just gave a constipated look when we were arguing about price, negotiating. I didn't say anything for like 60 seconds, and I just gave constipated looks. And she's like, oh my gosh, that's so awkward. Like, I have to say anything, and the guy dropped the price like $1,000. Like, I didn't even say a word. So even just dealing with awkward, annoying, just sitting there doing nothing, the kids are they're not gonna deal with it well. So I thought that was a good quote. Time lasts forever when you're two. Yeah.
Well, and I hope for anybody who's listening, like my hope for every podcast that I do is that somebody will be encouraged, you know, and I don't have it all together. None of us do. I was asking some guys yesterday, and I'll ask you guys too. Like, it's just something I've thought about. I had really fond memories of Christmas and the holidays, and I look back on that and I think that was really great. And I hope to have that for my kids, where they think, man, I'm excited for Christmas, for the tradition and for the family values and some of the things that are you can look forward to. And when I think family, that's what I think about, is like Christmas and holidays and some of those things. I don't remember, I remember being disciplined, but very little. I mean, but I know I remember the fond times because we had a good family. But what I ask people is, and again, you know, feel free to share or not, but I asked a couple of guys last night at dinner if they had good Christmases, if they remembered having fond Christmases. And I've noticed parenting can kind of be different depending on how you were raised, what your example was. And it's sort of a ebb and flow. Like, I've noticed people that say, you know, I came from a split family and Christmas was just on the road going from one house to the other half the time. And, you know, parents trying to one up with gifts and things like that. Other people Christmas was like traveling all the time. But I guess I've seen that common thread of like, when you raise your kids in a certain way and they have a good childhood, it sort of sets a foundation. That's assuming that what I consider being raised was good. So what have you guys experienced as far as in your own childhood? What do you remember from the discipline, from the good, the bad, the ugly that your parents did that you brought on that made you better or worse?
Well, I was a perfect angel, so I don't.
You too?
Yeah. I don't know. Well, I think I broke my knuckle on my brother's forehead, and that taught me not to be hyper emotional. So
Really?
I've learned to chill out from that.
How old were you when that happened?
We were probably like 10 or something like that. Yeah. So, yeah. Learned to mellow out.
Rob, what about you?
So I had kind of a weird upbringing, and that's not the right way to say it, but I have 4 siblings, and they're all significantly older than I am. So my parents kind of went through the whole gambit of problem children through my siblings. They were all closely spaced together. They were pretty wild. You know, they all had their own little special flaws that, you know, that led to discipline issues. So when I came along 11 years after my next closest sibling, I was basically an only child with a set of parents who had already had to go through years of child rearing and discipline. So, you know, I would say that they were a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more chill. But my biggest thing is I didn't want to disappoint them. So it was, for me, there was always the fear of being disciplined, but it never really came to that. And I don't think it's because they were too mellow. I just think they had established what was acceptable and what wasn't, and I knew what the boundaries were. But it never, you know, I don't ever remember being spanked or anything like that. You know, I got grounded, I think, once, and it was deserved. And
what'd you do?
I'm
not going to say it on the podcast.
Well, and I was thinking it might be easier for us to say, like, what did we do that made our parents dislike us? You know, I can think of it's hard to come up with a specific example, but I can look back now and see in my own children's actions. I'm like, that was me as a kid. Like I used to wear these cowboy boots just incessantly. I constantly wore these cowboy boots, and that wasn't anything that like annoyed my parents, but I see now.
It's like your daughter wears mermaid pants.
Yeah, the mermaid pants. It's like I look at that and I think, please wear anything other than the mermaid pants by now, or the blue dress. Like we go literally, and it's fight after fight after fight over one piece of clothing. But I see myself in her. I did the same stuff. It wasn't mermaid pants for me, but
sure.
It was. I know in my older years, it was like video games. I was obsessed with Mario and would just play until I was falling asleep, and just I remember doing that and being so oblivious to how obsessed I was with video games.
Yeah.
And I remember my parents like, you got to stop playing the video game. And I didn't even realize, but now I see kids obsessed with YouTube and video games or whatever. And I think, you got to do something with your life. You got to get off that video game. And it's exactly like my parents. And I see now that was me. That was me a long time ago. So, yeah, I don't know. What other examples?
Something that I found interesting was that he said that we're changing society without even thinking about things, and this could lead into the other chapter too. Like, we've gone from 2-family households, a lot of divorce and stuff like that, and we haven't really tested this. Like, how has society changed when, in regards to raising kids? I think we're seeing the fruit of that when society seems to be on the verge of collapse right now. So I could be hyperbolic, but I think the difference between liberals and conservatives, I don't know if it was Jordan, but somebody said, like, if there's a fence in the road, a liberal will tear down the fence. It's like, why is that fence in the middle of the road? Let's tear it down. A conservative will look and say, why was that fence there in the first place? And then, is it okay if we tear that down? We need to look at things logically. We've liberalized divorce laws where, hey, we don't want women to be in terrible relationships and being abused, stuff like that. So we need to make it easier to get divorced. But have we made it too easy to get divorced that families are falling apart when they really shouldn't be? And kids are getting the result of that. So,
yeah, I was actually going to bring up the divorce law thing as well, because, we haven't lived through that where it was difficult to be divorced. It seems super easy now, and the fruit of that is potentially decades later. I mean, you don't see it in the kids until way later, but we definitely, in my opinion, we live in the best generation in history. I mean, it's really hard for me to hear people complain about society on their $1,000 iPhone.
Yeah.
On Facebook, which is a free platform for you to publish content instantly to the world. Like, it seems like, man, you really have got it made. There's other things you could worry about. And I know that there are problems, but, that does lead into the next chapter 6, which is actually basically this rule, which is set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world, is just a copy of Matthew 7:5, which says, you hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. I mean, it's identical to that verse in Matthew that just says, focus on yourself before you go around trying to change everybody else. And, he says, criticize the world, and I think it's the same thing, but the Bible goes a little bit more specific that just says your brother. Before you even criticize one person, let's deal with yourself. And I thought about that a little bit. I think in the beginning, maybe you think, okay, well, let me go ahead and take care of this plank so I can go ahead and get around to criticizing the world. But I got to thinking, I don't know if you ever get the plank out of your own eye. It's just, how would you know when you're like, okay, I'm good. Now I can go criticize the world. So
I think that's why Jordan got a lot of criticism for this chapter, because they say, oh, that means we can't do any social activism because we haven't, you're just telling us to shut up because we don't know anything. Like, well, it's kind of true. You shouldn't, if you've never run a business, maybe not criticize capitalism and see what business owners have to go through. You criticize government, you don't know what you're changing. If we need to tear down democracy or free speech, what's that going to look like? You need to become a little more learned in some things, become an expert before you want to tear down society.
Well, and he talks about the example of Hurricane Katrina, which is I was listening to Joe Rogan a while back when Jordan Peterson was on, the original one, and he kind of went into depth a little bit with that example. He talks about Hurricane Katrina is an act of God, and so some people would look at it as, well, God caused the flooding in New Orleans. But you can look at it in a couple different ways, and the way he was saying is, well, the hurricane's going to come no matter what.
They had a plan. They knew about this in 1978.
Yeah, they knew about the dikes. There was corruption. There was
a plan to do it.
Yeah.
They only got 40% of it done in 40 years. And
yeah, they knew better. And so you could really look at it and say the hurricane was going to come, but these people made individual choices that led up to those people dying. And it's harder to look at it that way, but I believe it's more true, more accurate to say, okay, let's just look at where the blame really lies. And it's really hard to cast blame on groups and just big, the police are all bad. Like, no, they're not. They're clearly not all bad. There is corruption. There is racism. There is segregation. There's a lot of bad things in the world, but I'm just a big believer in the individual. Like, what did you do? Did you take the plank out of your own eye? Did you put the money towards the dikes to make sure that didn't happen? Did you do your best?
There was a woman who Jordan, I think, was a patient of Jordan's, and said she hopes that all her suffering was her fault, because if it's God or society, she is doomed because she has no control over that.
Yeah.
She has control over herself. Like, it's kind of like, whoa, somebody's like, I hope my failings are my fault. Like, all this pain I'm going through, all the suffering, my fault. We don't think about that. We want to blame society, this, that.
Well, and that's the easy road. It's easy to blame other people and say, well, if it wasn't for those people, I would have been more well off. But it's more complicated than that. It's
if a cop is kneeling on your neck, then it's obviously not your fault. Well, that's that's something that you can't fix. So that is something to be complaining about. But even Solzhenitsyn said he had to go through World War II, soldier, and then he got sent to the Soviet gulags, and then he had every right to be bitter and this and that, but then he found a purpose. He is like, is there anything I've done to contribute to this? He voted. He was a communist in communist revolution or whatever. He supported the party. The party turned against him. So finding out what you can do to improve your world will give you will give you purpose, to improve yourself. And then how could you help your neighbor? And then how could you help society in general?
And Jordan Peterson talks about the things that you need to choose to do on the micro. Like, I need to make a decision. You can't really make decisions that help anybody other than yourself, even your family. But you might make a decision that helps you and your family. Like trying to go back to the first chapter, trying to parent your kids well. That's a decision that's going to be day by day, that's going to help you be less stressed, which will help your future, which will also help them. But then he kind of does what you did, where he says, let's try to make yourself better, and maybe your family, and maybe your neighborhood, and then maybe it makes society a little bit better if you're lucky. But you can't skip the steps and just say, I'm going to do something and try to fix society by, I don't think, really any means other than good conversation, because the conversations, that's the whole point of this book study, the podcast, is to have a conversation that's encouraging, that makes people think, that retrains their brain, and makes them think, I'm going to make a little bit better decision right now, because that's really all you can do.
The discussion today was about defunding the police, and the city council person in Minnesota or Minneapolis was talking about defunding the police. How have you thought about this? What's going to happen? Like, okay, the police are racist and they abuse, so let's just have no cops. Have we thought about the side effects? What's going to happen? Like, we've seen a week without cops doing anything. There's rioting and cities have been burning, and, we've had gunshots and innocent people killed left and right. I don't think we've really thought this through. So you need to become a police chief. You need to understand the police. You need to understand the victims. You need to understand prisoners. You need to get a broad-based view on this thing, and you just can't be simple-minded and just say, okay, cops are gone.
Well, and I think that social media and the internet has made things so much better and so much worse. Like now, I've even thought about, like, we're just reading a book and kind of regurgitating our thoughts on somebody else's thoughts, but that's how we formulate our thoughts, is we take bits and pieces of, well, I like what this guy says, and I like this chapter, and I like this other thing, and you kind of pull it all together, and that's what makes you as an individual. But a lot of people, the news outlets, I don't know what you can trust anymore. Like, I've heard statistics on this coronavirus thing that are just, Bigfoot got the coronavirus. And like, oh, like, you can find anything you want on the internet of, oh, the coronavirus is now infecting babies. And it's like, is it really? Like, how do we know? And you just don't know. It's just really hard. I feel like the data that we receive is difficult. And the reason I bring up data is because when you're formulating your thoughts on, what do I think about police violence or any of these things, it's hard to look at true data and really get an idea of, is there a systemic problem, or is it that there's 2 or 3 people here that have a record of being a bad cop and should have been fired a long time ago, or reprimanded, or going back to the other chapter, their parents should have been better parents and made them a better human being a long time ago.
Being an engineer by trade, I deal with numbers, I deal with facts, right? So I have to take the data that's available to me and make the best engineering decision I can. And if I don't do that, a building could collapse or a bridge could collapse, right? So it's very important to take the right information to come up with a design, a plan to move forward. And with all the things we're dealing with now, the COVID-19 stuff, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the policy changes that are being proposed, like the crazy Minneapolis council person who wants to defund the police. Why can't people sit down and look at the actual data and the actual facts and come up with policy changes that make sense instead of these sensationalist movements that overall they're just not well thought out, right? It's change for the sake of change, but with no real goal.
So I'm going to ask you a question about that because I've asked that same question, but where do you guys get your data? Like, if I want to go look up, let's pick a particular topic, like how many police shootings have happened in the U.S. in the past 10 years? Like, I don't know where to exactly get that information.
So I looked up an article, Wall Street Journal, it said 250 police shootings last year. And I think 9 of them, I'm a little fuzzy. I think 9 of them were unarmed. So 241 were armed. And then I think 3 of them were black men. So I think.
And where do you get your numbers?
I just saw an article from a Wall Street Journal on it. But
well, and I guess what I'm wondering is if it's not out there, I feel like we deserve statistics that are just unbiased. You just get the numbers, and you could, if I could make it, it'd be amazing. But just a website where you could say, okay, let's go into crime. How much crime has happened in my city? How many of the deaths were because the police shot them, or same with the coronavirus. I mean, we talked about this in the past, like how many people actually died from the coronavirus, or how many people died and happened to have coronavirus, because those numbers are very, very different. Yep. And I feel like with all the information we have in the world, it's almost information overload. Like, it's hard to get information without having an opinion piece or some sort of news bias attached to it, where you're getting the data and it's spun in a way. I mean, the coronavirus made the world different, which I think is funny, because after this most recent police killing, it seems like coronavirus just disappeared for a while, and it's like, okay, the news is on to this other thing. But I think the repercussions of the coronavirus still are going to be in effect, where people are like, I don't even know. The CDC's giving us numbers here. Are they real? Are they exaggerated? Do we know these models? Because how can you go from, I think at one point in time they were talking like 8 or 9% of the population dead, like on par of close to 2.5 to 3 million people just in the U.S. dead. That's a really big deal. Now we're looking at 0.02%. And it's like, how do you get a discrepancy that big on numbers and facts?
I think it's 0.2.
0.2? Is it 0.2?
I think the latest estimate.
So, well, and there you go. My math's wrong. Yeah. But still, from 10% or 5% down to 0.2.
I think it was like 3% initially, and now it's just, there's so many asymptomatic people. I think they were in a prison and 52 people tested positive and none of them had symptoms.
Yeah.
So it seems we don't know that parts of your DNA, blood type, it could be vitamin D levels. Like, there's a lot of factors that we don't know why some people, if you're immunosuppressed, just get it really bad, and some people it doesn't affect you at all. So,
well, and I guess the point is just we don't know. I struggle to find numbers that I really believe in, and numbers that can be parsed out to say, and again, going to the coronavirus, how many of these deaths are 75 and above with heart conditions and, pre-existing conditions, whatever, versus, because like I mentioned earlier, joking, but not really, I've heard several people say, well, it's affecting young people now. And it's like, well, is it? I don't know where to look to see if that's true or not, because in the nation of 350 million people, there's bound to be one young person that gets sick and dies of it. I mean, the odds are incredibly high that 1 or 2 young people are going to get the disease and die of it. and maybe they didn't have a pre-existing, who knows? But to scare everybody into this just shutdown, job loss, suicide rates spiking, all this stuff, we have to have real numbers. With the police too, it's just hard to know what to believe anymore.
I think there's two things. I think there's a lot of bad journalism that goes on nowadays, right? So
Amen.
you go to a website, I go to yahoo.com. They get paid based on advertising, which is paid based on clicks.
Yep.
Every article is a half article, half the facts spun one way or the other to get you to click on it. And you couple that with these agenda-driven narratives, right? So it's an election.
If it gets you fired up, you're going to click on it. You see a bad title, oh, I'm going to click on that, and get you angry.
For sure. And this is being an election year, that's exacerbated, right? They want people to be emotional. So my wife actually told me today that she reads these articles and then she'll research it, right?
Yeah.
And she'll find out that it's all BS, right? It's only sort of true.
Right.
But that lingering effect in the back of her mind, she's scared about something or she has an emotion about something and it's stuck there. Even though it's completely not true or half true at best, it's still in the back of her mind.
Yeah.
So my feeling with Black Lives Matters, I think a lot of people are actually doing harm to black kids. So if I was a black kid and I was saying that America is racist, that I can never succeed in this world, that people are out to get me, that is going to harm me if I'm constantly told that. And I see every 6 months I see a shooting, and the media makes a big deal about it. It's going to create animosity in me. It's going to create animosity towards my society. It's going to create animosity towards everybody I interact with. How do you live and work in a society that you hate? How do you get a job and work with people that you don't like? So if you're constantly told that you can't make it, why are you even going to bother trying?
Yeah, the system's against you from the beginning. And Jordan Peterson talked about that when he talks about basically the depths of where that leads to when you're just all hope is lost. It ultimately leads to
nihilism.
Yeah, the Columbine people
out.
that they want to kill, not just somebody that they hate anymore. They just want to kill the innocent because that's an image to them of a false reality. People that are happy, that's not real because their life is a disaster and they have no hope. And that's where it leads to is, I think he mentioned, that we've all seen like the homeless guy that you just don't even want to look at him because they just hate you. They don't even know you, but they just look at you and they're so downtrodden. And when the world is telling you, you got all these things stacked against you, I mean, it's hard to come out of that.
I've seen going through Facebook, they show the guy, he's talking to a group of kids, white, black. They talk about privilege. If you have two parents in your household, take 2 steps forward. If you lived in a poor neighborhood, take 2 steps back, and try to show white privilege and whatnot. But then they start the race, and then some black kid runs hard. And then some in the back don't even try because they know that the race is rigged. Yeah. So if you constantly tell people that the race is rigged, they're not going to try. But in this world, you have a long life. It's a long race. It's not a 100-meter sprint. It's a long race, and it's not just you're racing for you. You're racing for your kids. So everybody wants to give their kids a better life. But if you give up at the starting line, okay, yeah, America did bad things. You need to start the race. You need to improve your life, set your own house in order before you criticize the world. Get education, get skills, interact, market, Networking. So,
People talk about these days the inequity of what people have, but you rarely hear people talk about the inequity of effort. You look at the difference in those two things. Like it's easy going back to what we talked about earlier about it's easy to complain and blame and say, well, I got a bad hand, and people do get a bad hand. I mean, but when you look at the cards, you think, okay, and I'll just use this example. We go to game night, every once in a while, and I haven't been in the game night forever. I've never been in a poker league like Rick has. So I go kind of thinking, I'm just going to go to hang out. I'm going to lose the game anyway. And I don't try that hard a lot of times because I'm just thinking, whatever, who cares? I don't care. There's nothing at stake here. So I'm just going to play. Of course I want to win, but my effort is not as good. And actually I was talking to my brother about it. He's a big gamer, and he plays board games with his buddies all the time. And he said, dude, give it a shot. Like try, like get out there and really focus and try. And I thought, yeah, maybe I should. And I have noticed I'm like the median. I can make it to the middle sometimes at least. But it's so easy to blame somebody else in the world. Like, oh, well, my parents or my whatever. And again, going back to the book, Jordan Peterson talks about something as drastic as abuse. He was like, if you were abused, if statistically you were going to abuse because you were abused, within 20 generations, billions of
everybody in the
people,
world.
10 billion.
yeah,
20
10 billion people, more
Yeah.
people than live on the earth now would be abusers. But that doesn't happen. It's the opposite effect. Most people are like, I'm not going to be like that. I'm not going to be like my dad. I'm not going to be like my uncle or whatever abuse they dealt with. So it is possible to overcome any adversity, I think. Now, life's not fair. I mean, I know I've thought often if I could choose another career path, it'd be cool to like work for NASA or SpaceX or something cool. Like, but to be honest, like you're not going to work for NASA unless you're trying from an early age, focused on that in your career, but also you probably need to live in the DC area and know somebody who works at NASA. I've never met anyone who's ever worked at NASA. And the reason I thought about that is I actually did some IT work for a contracting group that works for NASA in DC. And I just thought, man, how do these guys get these jobs? It was just crazy. Well, they live there, and my buddy knows a guy, and his dad worked here, and it was just it was luck. It's just they happened to live there. Am I not qualified to work there? Not necessarily, but it was just the hand that guy was dealt, and I was not dealt that. So I could look at that and blame others and say, well, if my dad had moved to DC, maybe I would work for NASA too. Or I can look at it and say, well, that's just not the hand I was dealt. Let me play the cards that I have. And, you can win with a pair of twos if you play them right. So Is that right, Rick? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there could be a lot of benefit by, focusing on getting back to the family unit. So it is hard to get ahead if you're a single mom with 3 kids living in a bad neighborhood with low-paying jobs at best, right? But there seems to be an abundance of single moms in poor neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And we talked about fatigue and all that, right? So you're overwhelmed. You're working 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Your children don't have the discipline and support that they need. So they're going to go on and they're going to potentially live that same lifestyle, right? And make the same decisions that lead to that next generation having the same problems. So, it could be just a refocus on family units.
Absolutely.
That could.
Well, going back to some of the conversations I've had recently with people who've been through divorces and things, it always comes back to some sort of a selfish motive of like, I want more freedom. I want more alone time. I want to date again, or whatever that selfish reason is. There's very rarely a what I would call a legitimate reason for the divorce of the family. It's usually just a selfish, like, well, I'm just tired. My wife's just really frustrating me all the time, or, in a lot more crude way. You guys know, but
what? No.
But people don't even like to have these conversations where you say, okay, a single mom, it doesn't just happen. You don't just wake up one day a single mom. Like, most of them are bad decisions after bad decision after bad decision, bad parenting that led to bad kid, that led to decisions for what, and there's a variety of reasons. There's a million reasons why those decisions are made. And the decisions don't even matter. It goes back to you as a person making that choice and thinking, okay, what can this lead to? And I know, we're all human. Like, we all want to do things, I think, that lead us down a path that ultimately would end in disaster. Whether it's just, I want to eat whatever I want. We know that leads to a bad, unhealthy life. And there's another huge list of things that we know if we just led that life, we know the end result. And maybe people are not educated enough to know that, but we're talking basic life here. Like, this is how you become, you get yourself into a situation and get a DUI. You don't get a DUI if you don't drink and drive. It's just, it's basic, but maybe for some people it's not. And it's unfortunate because I was listening to somebody last night that's in a situation where they're about to lose their license forever. And, but maybe you wake up and it's too late. Well, it is what it is. But anyway, I could go on. I just really think in this world we need everybody to turn the mirror on themselves and say, what can I do to help Chad? And maybe that will help my family. Maybe it'll get to you guys, and then maybe it'll hopefully affect the world.
And I'm not going to deny there are certainly aspects of policies and the way things are done that make it harder for people to get ahead.
Sure.
Undoubtedly. But if you could at the same time publish facts that say, if you make these decisions in your life, despite the hardships, you will have a much greater chance to succeed.
Yeah.
I think there was a study that said if you graduate high school, get married before you have children, and don't do drugs, you have like a 98% chance of not living in poverty.
Right.
So, yeah, don't do stupid stuff. You can succeed in this world. Like, I'm a full-fledged believer in capitalism. Like, some people are talking about, it's not just the cops. We need to tear down capitalism. These businesses are evil, so we need to loot them. Capitalism has brought more people out of poverty than anything. Socialism doesn't work out too well, and people starve. So if we tear down buildings, burn buildings, where are people going to live? Who's going to have food? If a company goes out of business that sells you food, like, where are you getting your food? You're going to have to go 3 miles to get food, or 30 miles to get food. The logic isn't there. And I get being angry, and I think the media obviously makes people more angry, but I think we need to chill out, relax, work on yourself, work on your family, work on your community.
Well, I was talking to some guys the other day, and the three of us actually recently have talked about, wow, with coronavirus, a lot of stocks are down. And so we're kind of playing around like, man, let's buy these American Airlines stocks and Royal Caribbean or whatever, because they're inevitably going to go up. I would call that a smart decision. But I was talking to somebody the other day that was they were criticizing, well, in times like these, the rich get richer. And then 10 minutes later, he was talking about the same thing. Man, I just bought a bunch of stock. And it's like, you're the guy. But I don't think that's a bad thing. That's just smart.
You're preventing companies from going out of business. Like, if they lose all their money. By you buying stock, you're helping them stay afloat. So
and you benefit from it. And there's nothing wrong with that, because a lot of the things that our society points at is it's almost like evil to want to get ahead. But everybody wants to get ahead. Everyone wants to win. Everybody wants to be the winner. They want to be on top. I mean, nobody walks around saying, yeah, I hope that I'm not successful in life, and I hope I get a terrible job that I hate. Like, that's just not natural.
There is a guy, I think in chapter 11, his buddy, who did say that.
Well, yeah, never say never.
Yeah.
There are some.
Spoiler alert, he commits suicide. It doesn't work out well.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think what I feel a lot of people do nowadays, especially with social media, is they virtue signal and they just say, look, I'm a good person. And because it's cool to do some of these things on social media and nothing else. You know, it's like,
it doesn't make you better. It doesn't make anything.
I think it's the equivalent of like having a political debate on Facebook or a religious debate on Facebook. It's totally pointless. I don't think anybody's ever said, you know, I read this really compelling Facebook post from somebody and I totally changed my mind. A conversation on the same topic, I believe, does have the power, because the social media has taken down the wall of sitting face to face with somebody and saying something that might be harsh because they might react to you. You can say whatever you want, you know. It's like
but you have to develop a relationship. You have to care. Right. So I think social media is just like, I have this picture in my head of this evil person, and I think I know what they believe, but really in my mind they really don't believe it. They straw man them. But I think they think this thought that, you know, and it's not true. So you really have to develop a relationship where, hey, we could disagree, but we're friends, and I think this because of this, and you may disagree, but that's where I'm coming from. Like my wife and I, when we were talking about, I was saying like how it's harmful that being constantly told that America hates you could be toxic on your soul. And she's like, well, you need to understand what their thoughts are. And I'm like, yeah. So I could be criticized for not being empathetic towards them, but I do care. I don't want black kids to think America hates them, and I don't want them being their neck kneeled on by a police officer either. But so developing a relationship, you could have disagreements, and it is a lot more fruitful if you are friends with somebody and you could talk about this thing. So a lot of times people always assume the worst intentions. You say something and they interpret it the worst way possible. And if you're friends, usually it's not, they don't.
Well, and if we want a solution, right? Like to whatever particular problem. We want the solution. We want, in the case of coronavirus, the vaccine, right? We want the silver bullet that just solves the problem. But I have not heard an argument yet that if we do this, it'll fix it. Like people say, let other people have their voices. Okay. I mean, I have not heard one person yet that said, yep, that guy was right. He should have kneeled on that dude's neck and killed him. Like one thinks that was a good choice. Everyone thinks that the guy should be convicted of murder.
We were united. Everybody agreed that was terrible.
Yeah. And but it's not a solution. It's like, I even saw someone post recently that was like, well, don't trust the police if they kneel and like whatever, because the next day they'll be knocking you down. It's like, well, what do you want? Like, what is the thing you're waiting to see to say, okay, it's great?
After I just say, don't think of people's worst intentions, I'm going to tell people what I think they think. I think people use nebulous terms like systemic injustice, where they can't point to a specific law. They can't point to, they could point to a specific act, which, like, if you could do a specific act, I'm going to agree with you. Yeah.
Yep.
But if you just say broadly, America's racist, It's harder. I really want specifics, and then we could fight those. But I think a lot of people just say systemic because they don't want specifics, because they want to keep this anxiety up. Some of it for political purposes, I believe, but some people won't, like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. If they solve the problem, they're out of a job, so they don't really want to solve the problem, in my opinion. But
I completely I agree with that. So I would say right now, more so than any time in my life at least, this movement has the ear of just about everyone right now. So you have everyone's ear. What is it you want? And it can't be this broad stroke fix it. That doesn't, there's no answer to that. You need to come up with, this is a problem in our society, this specific thing. You need to change your laws accordingly. Change this specific law so it states this. Make it so banks can't have predatory lending. Make laws that target that, right?
Yeah.
But you have to have specific solutions in mind. You can't just have everyone go on Facebook and say, I support this. What do you support? What are you supporting? What is the fix that you're trying to support?
Well, and like Rick said, I'm more than willing to have a conversation, but what are we going to talk about? Like, this is what I would talk about is, I don't care who's sitting across, do the best that you can do is the same message, I think, for everybody. If you're not happy with your job, try to get another one. If you need more money, try to get a job that pays better. If you still don't like your job, get more education. I mean, you can learn Portuguese on YouTube if you want tonight. It's just, there's no excuse.
I think there is racism, obviously. And, okay, maybe say 10% of American society is racist. You still could do business with 90% of society. 90% of people are willing to give you a job. So work with that, You're never going to change everybody's mind. It's only going to anger you if you try to change people's minds. So live your best life. 90% of people, I think 99% of the population thought what the cop did was wrong.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I know it's complicated because there's protests, but then some turn into riots, and there's in my mind, a clear difference between someone protesting, because just a few weeks ago, I was frustrated that people were getting arrested for protesting the coronavirus. Like, that's part of a constitution. We need to be able to protest if we want to, but protesting and throwing a brick through the Target window is a totally different thing. In my mind, that's a criminal act, again, to the individual. If you're carrying a sign to the police station or to the town hall, or you want to get up and talk, perfect. I think, again, conversation, but throwing a brick through the Nike store and grabbing a bunch of sneakers you should also be locked up. But the complicated part, I see Trump's talking about bringing in the military. The looting and rioting and stuff needs to stop. But at the same time, it's such a conundrum because we're talking about fighting the police, but the police are the ones that are supposed to stop that stuff. We don't necessarily need tanks rolling in. And I thought about, I don't know if you guys have seen the Waco documentary. Well, it's a TV show really that's come out, but I remember Waco as a kid, and I remember watching it burn on TV.
it was my birthday that
Was it? Oh,
burned.
Happy birthday. Yeah. All those disasters in April.
And then the Oklahoma City bombing,
right.
And I think Columbine shooting was on the same day.
Yeah.
Just
bad
stuff.
And the TV show, it talks about, I guess my point is that they tried for days and days to have a peaceful, hey, you guys come out of there, let's just talk, whatever. If you're not doing anything wrong, that's fine. Then in the documentary, somebody ends up shooting a dog, and everybody starts shooting everybody, and they shoot tear gas in there, and it blows up. And at the end, they talk about how many other protests they started shooting tear gas into, and it ignited. So, and there's a bunch of them. So
Yeah.
it's like the tear gas actually blows up and makes things worse. So, bringing in the military, I feel like that might be drastic. But it's difficult when the police I'm not going out there because the people they don't want me. They're protesting me and my job. And I look at my friends who are officers, and I think, this guy should be able to go out and do his job. And why would anybody hate him? He's a great guy. He's an awesome officer. He's been an officer for years. So
I think it comes down to nihilism. Like Jordan says, life is hard. We all die. We all get disease, and life is hard. And then if you're constantly fed that America hates you, you're gonna lash out. And you're just going to say, screw it. I'm just going to tear this mother effer down. And, then you're going to get more extreme. But if you believe in America, American principles, and that America with mistakes is ultimately trying to fix those and ultimately good, then you're going to live in the system. You're going to respect rule of law. You're not going to set buildings on fire. You're not going to punch people in the head, shoot guns, and set buildings on fire. So I think hopelessness is a thing, and I think Jordan said inescapable tragedies, and when you encounter them, so you'll feel stronger and less bitter when you improve yourself. Inescapable tragedy, encounter them so that they remain tragic and don't degenerate into outright hellish anger. So, your corrupted soul, you will see your existence as something to celebrate. So instead of just having just this hopeless existence, if you better yourself, you'll feel stronger, less bitter, and you'll be able to help others, help society, and you won't lash out in anger at stuff.
Yeah, and I know that there are things in the world that are tough. Again, the Jeffrey Epstein situation, it's just, you think, how can somebody constantly get away just because they have a lot of money? They can get on work release and basically pay their way out of the consequences. That is.
He didn't kill himself, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, there again, you have to wonder, right? I know it's like a big joke, but it's kind of not. It's like, how can a person that has committed that much crime basically get away with it, and then he gets off the easy way?
Many friends.
Yeah, and you think, how many friends did he have? And I get that. And when you see things like that in the world, it is difficult not to think, man, this whole thing is a disaster, and I'm never going to beat the system, because there's people like that at the top that have more money than anybody in the world, and they can just pay their way out of jail, literally. I understand that we see things like that, and it's on Netflix, but it's not. It is true. It's real life. Same with Waco and all these things. I think some of those are, maybe I watch too much Netflix, but I can see how people would get upset with the corruption. I do believe there's massive corruption in the government. But we've seen it here in Charlotte, where it doesn't matter what side of the party you're on. You say, hey, we're not voting for this particular thing, and it comes through anyway. It's like, oh, sorry, we think it's in your best interest. So that's just not right. It's not right. And it happens on both sides, because there are people that have money and power involved, and it really stinks to see that. But, in times like the coronavirus and things like that, I think it's good for people to let these big companies crash and burn, and because the term "too big to fail" always bothered me, and because a lot of times they are the ones that are paying for ads. I mean, none of us could run for any office, because we don't have millions of dollars to buy flyers and 20 interns to go out calling people to vote for Rob Condon for, State House, whatever. We just don't have the money. You have to have money. And somebody brought to my attention today again, the number of people that don't vote is the majority, which is really actually sad. What that says to me is they just don't think they can make a difference. And I've honestly wondered that myself. Like, do I actually have a voice in this world? Does my vote actually count? You got to wonder. So I see why people can see those documentaries and see the corruption and see the stuff in the government they don't like. But it still goes back to just do your best, because you can't change it. And getting upset about it is not going to fix it.
I think gratitude really helps. Like, the poorest person maybe not the poorest person, but the average poor person in the U.S. lives better than the King of England in like 1400.
Right.
They have the stupid court jester. We have Jerry Seinfeld. We have Chinese food, Italian food. We have air conditioning, heat. They didn't have central heat or air conditioning. So society has constantly improved. We have more technology in our hand than the space shuttle did. So I think we need to have gratitude for the way society has progressed. And before we want to tear down the system, we need to think about things a little more clearly and be a little more cautious. And
you're right. And even in today, forget the past. Even today, if you live in the United States, you're already like in the 1% of the world just because you live here.
Yeah.
And then it's like everybody I know in my life has an iPhone, and it's just crazy to hear people complain about society and how capitalism stinks, and they're using an iPhone, like I said earlier. just that's a kind of a basic thing, but it's kind of like, man, you've really got it made. Like, I don't know what people complain about. I know injustice is wrong, and all that, but it's hard to put your finger on it. But at the end of the day, it goes back, like I keep saying, to the individual. It's like, what did that person do or not do?
It's the only thing you can control.
It is.
Yep. Injustice is one thing, but if you're sitting here complaining about inequality, there's always going to be inequality.
Yep.
Right. You can't live your whole life being jealous of
your devilish good looks.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
but the whole concept, right? So, do I want to have my boss's salary? Sure. Do I want to be independently wealthy and not have to work and just golf all the time with you guys? Sure. But that's not a reality.
No.
Right? So you can't sit here and just be jealous of what's ahead of you and people that have more stuff than you. All you can do is do the best with what you can do and live like we keep saying, live your best life. But if you're constantly looking at what you don't have, you'll never be happy.
And you're totally right. And I think Jordan Peterson said something it was sad, but it's so true. He said, eventually everything you do will fail. Like, you're going to die, you're going to retire, or whatever, it will all fail.
Kids are going to blow your money.
Yeah. It's so, cause I think a lot of times for guys like us, for me, the struggle is like, man, if I just had, like you said, independent wealth, like if I could just not have to ever work again, that'd be the dollar amount, and it's hard to get that dollar amount because it's always growing and life moves and stuff. But that would be the goal, right? Like if I knew, okay, I don't have to ever worry about money. But I think that we're designed to struggle. I think that growth comes in the struggle. And, you see you see Jeffrey Epstein with the biggest house in Manhattan, and he was just empty and trying to fill his life with
teenage girls.
Like, it's just crazy. And islands, and like, it's like, dude, who's better than this guy? And he killed himself, allegedly.
No, he didn't.
No chance.
But yeah, I think the journey and the struggle is so essential. And it's hard to say like enjoy the struggle, but it's sort of like driving to the beach. You know, we just went to the beach, and I just think it's not too bad of a drive, but you think, I'm ready to get this drive over. But I'm trying to learn to enjoy the drive and just look at the trees going by and enjoy that part. Because if you can learn to enjoy the struggle,
there's nothing sweeter than a cold drink of water after a 10-mile run. It's like, oh, that's so good. Like, so yeah, sometimes you got to hurt, you got to go through some stuff, but you're going to appreciate life better.
Absolutely. Well, guys, thanks for coming on. It's really insightful. I hope that it was encouraging for you, and I hope that people that are listening are encouraged as well. I thought a lot about today. Like that's just really my goal. I enjoy doing the podcast, and I enjoy getting to spend time with friends and talk about tough topics. I honestly was struggling with this one today a little bit. I thought it's probably going to be a little harder to talk about, but I know people are going to disagree with everything we've said, some things, but I would encourage everybody, if you disagree, let's have a talk about it. Let's not post and rant on Facebook, but let's sit down and talk. And I honestly feel that the majority of the people that are the squeaky wheels out there are on the far left and the far right, and that's all you see. You don't see the person that's reasonable and says, well, I can see how you might think that way, but this is my life experience. So reach out to us. I know I, for one, would love to just have a conversation with anybody that, whether you agree or disagree. And just that's part of my contribution back to society is just, let's work this out. Like, what can I do to stimulate a conversation that will maybe make myself a little bit better by hearing from smart guys like yourself, and maybe I'll be a little bit better dad tomorrow, and maybe my girls will do something, you know? So anyway, thanks for coming out, and we'll catch you next time.